Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another Advanced Behavioral Health podcast, Making a Difference in Mental Health. I am your host, Danielle Young, with my co-host, Wendy Grier. And today is a very special show because it is actually our 20th episode and our season finale.
Hi, everyone. So excited. Danielle, wow, can you believe that we did 20 episodes of this? Amazing.
I'm still in disbelief, but at the same time, it feels really good to be able to put our mind to something that we used to discuss kind of just to ourselves and amongst ourselves, and to put it on a platform where we actually have an audience and the audience connects with us. And so what better way to talk about the entire season than to recap our favorite shows and our favorite moments. But Wendy, before we do that, I just have to do one last time for this season. How you doing?
Hey, Danielle, how are you? Hi, audience. I'm doing great. As you said, this is our final episode, our 20th episode, season 1. You know, you and I did talk about just very simple, the movement of being able to, destigmatize mental health, and how could we do that? How could we use ABH in our platform to make mental health just as important as physical health? And so I'm so excited. We had some really great guests, and I look forward to us just recapping those special moments and those special guests that appeared on our podcast. Go ahead, hit it.
Yeah, I have just been thinking about the past couple of months that we've been able to gather guests together and have different perspectives from the areas of mental health, and then everyday life situations and everyday life occurrences that actually some way, shape, or form cross paths with mental health, or cross paths with the conversation about our mental, emotional, physical health. Also about resources within the community that can also help us. But you know what? Let's start just from the top. Let's start from when we first began. We took a look at men's mental health in the month of June 2021. So what do you remember about that particular month? I have a couple of things that stand out, but what stands out to you specifically about June and Men's Mental Health Month?
Well, I think the very first thing is that June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. I had no idea about that. And secondly, I thought it was a good idea to spotlight men, because who does that? We don't do that often. And thirdly, it was a nice idea to have men that we work with, colleagues that we work with that are therapists, to come to our podcast and talk about things that are important to men. So what stood out for me was the Fatherhood Roundtable. I love that. We had men who work in our agency at ABH who were in different stages of fatherhood, and just recounting and talking to one another about their experiences, and those who are seasoned fathers sharing their knowledge and wisdom with the new one coming on, just to be a father. I think it was Jonathan who was about to have a baby, and he was so appreciative of all the information that was shared by our other guys who have been experienced fathers for a while. So that was really touching. I think what they touched upon was the idea of, being vulnerable, but at the same time being positive force in your family and with your relationships in your family. And we focused a lot on them having daughters and what that meant to them, and how they handle raising their children, and focusing on what the family needs. So it was really, really lovely to see our guys talk.
And I absolutely remember the same thing. I had written that down as one of the memorable moments where you could see it was visually recorded. Of course, everyone in our audience hears it from an audio space, but you could see the guys giving each other thumbs up, or they were connecting on so many different areas and so many different conversation pieces. And like you said, that we had a range within the journey of fatherhood. So we had Jonathan, who at the time was preparing to be a father, and now is
a father.
His little one is here.
His baby girl. Yep.
Yes. And then on the other end of that spectrum, we had Daryl, who is preparing or is already a grandfather. And so, we even discussed, like you said, the connection of father to child, father to daughter. And I remember even Raymond having a lot of input on what to say. And when you spoke about the vulnerability, actually admitting some fear or some trepidation, which I think is natural, but men don't always have the space to be able to hold to express those moments. So that definitely stood out to me about the roundtable. And then we also had Jamal Davis, who was another therapist with the agency. Do you remember that story? That story always sticks out to me about raising Black boys and having to distinguish, even from the outside, what you look like, even though your friends, the son's friends were the same age group, and, the innocence of it all, but not being able to play. I think it was like a sundown game or something that really, for me, as a Black woman who has Black brothers, who has a Black father, cousins, and godchildren and nephews, it really concerned me about the game that he spoke of, where in the day and age that we live, especially after George Floyd and so many other things that have happened within the Black community for Black men, definitely raised red flags for me. But I was also still appreciative that he was able to disclose that and expose that to our audience.
Right. I have to second that. I was taken aback when I heard that story, but it also points out what you just said, the innocence of it all. Kids really come out as a blank canvas. It's really, they're affected by what we do as parents, our social constructs, all of that, because they had absolutely no clue that his young boys could be put in a very dangerous situation. They were just like, I want to play with you guys. Let's go play. Let's do this game at night. How fun would it be? And so that was pretty powerful for me too. As a Black woman, as a mother, I'm like, oh no, that can turn out bad.
Right. And, I appreciate that we are able to maybe even open up just the consciousness of some of our audience who might not identify with that or who might not have those challenges or issues because they are not African American or they're not Black, or they don't have to necessarily worry about that challenge within their neighborhood or their area. That was very powerful. And then we had July, which was our month of self-care. We like self-care.
Talking about our wine, talking about our mani-pedis, talking about our beautification, our favorite topics for self-care. So Dr. Ball was our first guest, our medical director, and I love that conversation, that episode, because it really speaks to, hopefully, people in our audience. It speaks to what we do as our work here at ABH to focus on medication and how medication can be an integral part of self-care. And she had those great Mythbusters. Remember those?
Yes, I remember.
We talked about clients' hesitation in taking medication because they think if I take it, I'm going to get addicted, or if I take it, I can never get off of it. And so I love those things that she brought out about medication, and that treating someone who needs to be on medication from a holistic point of view, that you need to bring in family members, you need to bring in friends, you need to have that support system to encourage the client to just continue on through that path of medication. So I was super happy to hear those things and be able to share with our audience that, everything you hear about medication, not true.
Right. And I liked the Mythbusters again that you mentioned, because it kind of normalizes maybe some of the thoughts like, oh, I had this thought. Well, let me dispel that thought, versus having this stigma around it or making it either this secretive thing or this scary thing. Like you just said, it does take that community or that village, your family members, your friends, also making sure that you couple with your medication management, therapy. Those are things that can help in this space of holistic self-care when you have medication management as well. So Dr. Ball was definitely a necessary piece of that particular episode. Her input, her expertise, and then the Mythbusters was definitely necessary to enlighten and educate myself as well as our audience.
And I think, saying to our audience that if there is a time where you need medication and you're on medication, it doesn't mean you have to stay on medication forever. Right. That's key, because I think that's what people fear the most, that I'm going to have to take this medication for the rest of my life. And that's not true. That is absolutely not true. And so using med management with therapy services and changing behaviors and thought patterns are a very necessary piece of the puzzle so that one can get off medication. So I was happy to hear and do that particular episode with Dr. Ba.
Absolutely. And then following Dr. Ball, this was one of my favorite episodes because I got to see you and your dynamic with your brother. We did self-care and movement, and he came to educate us from a movement self-care space. And so I honestly just enjoyed sitting back and seeing the dynamics between the two of you. But also he brought a lot of education when it comes to the way that you feel from the inside out with the addition of movement can actually increase the feel good feeling that you may have. And I remember him saying something, even the way that you posture yourself, with him understanding sports medicine and understanding the body, even the way that your posture is, if you're in a low slumped mood, maybe you might be feeling low, or maybe you might be in a low mood, or maybe a depressed state. And he's able to recognize that, but also incorporate those things that can increase the physicality of your body, and that can also eventually increase your mood. So very educational, but also just fun to have your brother there. And what was the name? What's your nickname that he calls you?
Chet. Chet from when we were kids. So I enjoyed having him on. He's hilarious. I love him to death. He is super smart, very knowledgeable about his craft. And one of the things I like that he said in that episode was that he looks at himself as a problem solver, similar to how therapists are. And he likes to look at the whole person. So I used to tease him and tell him, you're a teenage girl whisperer, because he has a lot of teenage girls as clients. And he's gotten to know when they're not having a good day, when they're off, when they're upset, and him having to help process that so that he can get to the work at hand in terms of training and exercising and helping them. So we giggle about that quite often, but yeah, he's fun. He's fun to be around.
Absolutely. And I remember what it was. It's the psychosomatic reaction, psycho meaning the mind, somatic meaning the body, the way that you feel or the way that you think, it can manifest itself through the body. And so I really enjoy that from an educational space about physicality, because I definitely need to hit up the gym or, walk around the track a few times to get myself going. So that's another reason why I enjoyed the episode.
I'm always calling him like, hey, this hurts. Can you come fix it? So I think that's why he's successful, is because he does treat the whole person, and he really understands. He gets it that if your mental space is not where it needs to be, then you're not going to do well physically, and that you got to process that in order to be productive and have success. So that was a fun episode. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And, we'll have to have him back in some way, shape, or form for our next season. To end out that particular series, we had our very own CEO, Dr. Vera Kurdian, to come and talk about self-care and company culture. And so for me, I remember making the comment back when Vera was my supervisor many years ago. One of the first things that she did say was, you must take care of yourself. You must prioritize yourself, even in this position, even in this career, even in this industry. A lot of times as clinicians, as therapists, as counselors, as mentors, we carry a lot of, what our clients go through, sometimes unbeknownst to us. And sometimes that can be really, really heavy. And so taking a self-care day, because we were in the month of self-care, taking a self-care day to regroup, it was something that Vera really encouraged from the time I started, even up to this point where she is now in the position of CEO. And it was really cool to learn that no matter what, she always has her piano lessons.
Absolutely. That's her number one self-care activity. So I think from the perspective of being our CEO, I truly appreciate how she values the importance of the well-being of her staff and teaching and talking about and encouraging us to really look for our work-life balance and making sure that we do things that are considered self-care for ourselves and indulge when we need to indulge. So I appreciate that as our CEO, leader of our company, mental health clinician. So that's a good thing for us to hear. So that was a good episode as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then we had COVID and the school system for the entire month of August. I'm going to swing it over to you. What are some of your recaps?
You know, this topic was my passion.
I do. That's why I'm swinging it over to you. One particular episode stands out to me, but what are some of your thoughts and highlights from August?
So we had a guest that's new to ABH, a new partner, Mr. Steve Towles, who came on. He was program manager is the program manager for Transitional Youth Program with affiliated Sante Group here in Prince George's County, and he is part of the mobile crisis team. And so, funny story, he came in to talk to us and the site director at the time about his program and what he offers. And, lo and behold, we call the crisis center all the time when we have clients who are in crisis. But as we started to talk, our conversation kind of morphed into his experiences. He was a school clinical psychologist, and I was like, great, I need you on our podcast because I want to start talking a little bit about things that you and I had talked about, really, to be honest, all year long, about COVID and distance learning and education and what our clients were doing and showing and struggling with. And so he had a great perspective about that whole distance learning and, the school system. I agree with him, was put in a situation and had to do the best that they could with that situation to keep carrying on the learning, because that's what they're tasked to do. And so I appreciated him talking about that. I appreciated, I think there's a bits and pieces where we talked about what can parents do. And I remember him saying that, parents need to be patient. And lo and behold, that's what we were saying all year. Like, no, I can't make your child log on to distance learning, but I can help you understand what they're going through. And being patient about grades and patient about tests and so forth and so on, and not being punitive was very, very important to get your child through a really, really difficult time for kids and students. I think parents missed that and didn't quite understand the level of trauma that started to happen with their children.
Right. And I remember having the discussion too about, wouldn't it be interesting if we studied this particular cohort of students or this particular time, this time next year? The reality is that even though we're in our season finale and we're in October 2021, COVID is still here and it is present. And while it is not like it was in October 2020 or even January 2021 or even August, it is still here and it is still present. And we still have to look at it in the same way of being patient. The adjustment time and the adjustment period really, does take a long time. We do want our students to succeed, and we do want them to be able to have some type of normalcy in this new normal, but it will take some time. So I really appreciated his input too, from that particular perspective.
Well, to just piggyback on that, we're seeing it now. So when you said it'd be interesting to study a cohort of students who've gone through the COVID. So now we have students who have gone back to school, and what have we learned? They've completely forgotten how to socialize. So now we've reverted back to just our natural aggressive types of behavior. When things don't go well for them or they don't know how to say something, they're starting to fight. They're fighting in classrooms, they're fighting in the parking lots.
Yeah.
We see anecdotal evidence every day that, they have to relearn their social skills. It's quite fascinating from a clinician point of view,
Right.
how all of this is unfolding. So Danielle, you and I will definitely pay attention to this as
Absolutely.
we go through the rest of the year to see the adjustment period.
And I believe some of our conversation of how this podcast was even birthed was really around COVID and the school system and children and the adjustment. So, that's interesting, and quite the irony of it is that this all began because of COVID. We're still having the conversation, and now we're trying to figure out ways in which we can try our best to adjust. So.
Right. So then I think to carry on this conversation around school and COVID, we had a guest that I had worked with for maybe about 3 years when I was in the government in Montgomery County, and that was Greg Edmonston, who's the Director of Student Welfare Compliance for district-wide services and support. And so their task was making sure that the school provides a very safe environment for all students while they're learning. And I think what stood out for me is just the mere fact that it's the importance of student welfare, making sure that students are well, being transparent with the parents of the students that are involved in the different schools, and really giving out information. COVID, again, we're still in it. Very difficult, not only for the child, but for the parent, and just sharing the information about resources, what Montgomery County school system is doing to support the students and support the parents, and keeping everyone safe was a pretty critical part of the information. I think people don't realize how hard sometimes school systems do work to affect change and to address issues and problems. The other thing I want to point out is we did talk about, you and I have talked about this, symptoms. Increases in different types of symptoms and problems. And COVID really brought out an increase in cyberbullying because the kids were spending all of their time on social media and not interacting personally. And of course, there was cyberbullying before COVID, but it just went exponential once we were all quarantined and we had nothing else to do. So combating that, I think, is challenging, and is challenging for the school system, and will remain challenging as we, our social media increases, technology gets better. This generation is very tech savvy. So how do we get that? That's the bigger issue.
Yeah, and just listening to you about the cyberbullying, it's so interesting. Again, this generation is tech savvy, and sometimes the very thing that they enjoy is also the very thing that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure to be, the next big thing on social media, or to go viral, or to have, so and so amount of hundreds of thousands to 1 million views, or trying to fit in with the latest and the greatest of whatever is on social media. But also in the time of COVID, that's almost like the outlet of what our kids that we work with and those that we know had. So when there was one wrong thing or one mess up, I'm thinking of a young man in particular with cyberbullying, it became a big thing. But it's like, you can't go anywhere. They can't come see you. What, are they going to come out and see you? No, they can't. But it affected him so much. And it was so interesting. It's a family member. And, had to have a talk like, dude, it's okay. It's okay. These are just words. And at that point, we were still locked down. So, yeah, it was really interesting. And Greg offered a lot of insight and perspective from that space.
Right. And, just from a mental health perspective, again, I'll just highlight words matter. They absolutely matter. And that's what we see with our kids who struggle with fitting in and being popular and wanting to just be liked, and the whole social media cyberbullying aspect of it all is a challenging thing. And, we see it in our practice in terms of kids coming to us with self-esteem issues, depression, anxiety, and this just feeds into it. So hopefully through this podcast, we can start, attacking that subject matter as well to get people to understand there are other ways to feel special. There's other ways to feel important. That you don't have to do these kinds of things on social media to feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
It's just simple. Yeah. So it goes back to our self-care, mani-pedis.
Yep. Yep. I know. Listen, I could use a mani-pedi right now, but
I could use a massage. It's been a week.
Yeah. And since we're talking about students, to round out that particular month, now this is the one that stands out for me. We had Miss Madison Grier come on the show, who happens to be your intelligent, smart, resourceful, very candid and opinionated daughter. But I appreciated her so much because, for her particular age group too, even some of the clients that I work with who have transitioned into that college age group, she was kind of, not to say she was a spokesperson for all, but we had a firsthand experience, or listening to a firsthand experience from a teen who transitioned from high school to college during the time of COVID. And when I say she was very forthcoming and expressed herself, it was refreshing. And at the same time, the audience couldn't see my face, but I did make some faces. But, sometimes if you ask a question, you'll get an answer. And she certainly did give us her true, honest, real, and raw perspective on education, COVID, and the adjustment process.
Right. I think, she had conversations with her peers through the whole process. And, I watched her graduate through COVID, high school, and then enter college, stay 3 weeks at school. And then I had to go and get her because the pandemic was just exploding where she goes to school and it wasn't safe anymore. And then have to adjust and do distance learning again as a freshman in college was absolutely challenging. And I stayed close and I paid attention because I wanted to make sure her mental health was okay. And it took a toll probably in February of 2021 because she had been at it since high school, back in it, distance learning, and it was just hard. So I would just always encourage her to take breaks in self-care, and I just say, do the best you can. This is really an anomaly. Nobody really learns like this all the time.
Right.
And she she did a good job. She got through it. Grades were good, and then she moved on to her second year. But I did, because this was such a passionate topic for us, I did want to have a kid, young adult perspective, because it's always adults talking about all of this. And, we didn't know how a young adult felt internally. And I wanted her to be able to kind of speak for her peers about this whole experience being through COVID and distance learning and education and the pressures that these kids feel. I mean, there was a lot of pressure to get into college through COVID, like exams and applying. And, in a perfect world, there's a lot of pressure for that. But then you add on a pandemic and it was just out of control. So very proud of her. I'm glad she was able to come on our show and just share her perspective from that point of view.
And one thing that I remember her saying is that she said that she is a kinesthetic learner, and it brought to mind how many of our otherwise academically inclined students with the A's and the B's or the 4.0 GPAs or 3.5 or 3.0 and higher normally would be just fine in the classroom and can excel. But then the dynamic of decline in grades, also then decline in confidence and self-esteem due to COVID. And then also I remember her talking about having to be on the teachers, to contact the teachers, because our kids that have gone through, our kids and young adults that have gone through want to preserve, their academic status. And so I remember her specifically speaking about how she is used to learning and also having to adjust to that. And we also saw that even with our clients, the decline to those who otherwise would have no symptoms at all, but that COVID effect from an academic space as well as emotional and mental space was, it really did impact our teens and young adults.
Yeah, I hope our audience who are young and listening to this podcast paid attention that it was a hard year and it was okay that you had struggles and that you did the best that you could and that you can move on through this. So important topic, important month,
right?
Because we were just seeing so much in our practice. So we felt that we needed to get that out.
Right. And so for the month of September, we had a resources month, and I have a few that stand out to me. What stands out to you specifically about September? Because not only was resources month so good, we had to have another part 2 resource month for October. But let's go to September first. What stands out for you for September?
Sure. I think that having part 2 was necessary because there's just so many resources in our communities that people are not aware of, and I like the audience members to know about. So for the month of September, every guest that we had interesting and educational and informative things to share with us and our audience. So we had Dornay Hill on. Dornay is a personal friend. Dornay is someone I worked with for many, many years in child welfare, and I've just loved seeing her career flourish. And she's now the senior administrator for crisis intake trauma services for Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. I love talking to her about the crisis work that they do. And I think for me, working in child welfare, we had one place, one building, and that was the crisis center. And now there's satellite offices. And I love that. I think COVID made people start to think outside the box and become creative about how they can service the community. And so having those satellite office, best thing ever.
And it's the sign of the times currently that we're in. So, we kind of had to, all of us, and even all the agencies that have different resources for the community have had to approach this time in a new way to still be able to sufficiently and effectively apply services or make services available for those who are in need. And Dornay, she brought so much to the table with just describing that. And I'll say too, Wendy, I just kind of want to give you credit now in the middle of the show, because many of these guests have come by way of you through either your professional connection or professional work history, and even some of your personal friendships. And that really shows that there is a passion, even within your friend group, of those who have passion for the community and passion to help and passion for mental health and ways in which we can help bring awareness and raise wellness. So I just kind of wanted to shout you out for that as well.
Thank you for the shout out. I appreciate it.
Yes, definitely.
I love our podcast, and you and I are passionate about mental health and destigmatizing it and bringing on people that can make us think and give us knowledge and education. So when I think of a guest, and the guests that I've had on this podcast that I know, they are passionate about what they do. And I know that they're going to bring something great to the show, great to the audience, give us tidbits, information that we didn't know about, challenge our thinking. So I thank you for that, co-host. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And so we continued on with our resources month. Now, I have 2 that stood out to me. One was our conversation with our friend to ABH. She's also one of our colleagues, Miss Paula, with the conversation about Alzheimer's, but also the LGBTQ community and the combination that I never thought of. Like I never thought to put those things together. And that's why having the resource month was so good, because you bring different things to the table, different expertise, different areas of interest to our audience, so that if they connect with a specific topic or conversation, now they have a resource to use to apply. And so Paula also offering some heartfelt stories too.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes
that
too,
story was
yeah,
so touching, and
yeah,
it made me pause, say, wow, we have work to do in this
yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah. So, and then Dr. Ball returns.
Yeah.
So
our medical director.
Yes, we're going to keep Dr. Ball in rotation. I think she provides really good mental health moments. And I think it's always great to have her on for either a series or a show or just a moment where we increase awareness. And this particular episode was about a passion of hers about suicide prevention and also just awareness. So with Dr. Ball, I remember thinking to myself before the show, and then also while we were talking to her, and while she was providing us with psychoeducation, and also, again, somewhat of Mythbusters in this conversation, that it was going to be a sensitive topic for our audience. And so another thing about this podcast that I'm very proud of is that I remember even Dr. Ball saying, don't shy away from talking about these very sensitive but necessary and sometimes very emotional topics that can sometimes impact us, family members, friends. It can even impact work. But I remember wanting our audience to understand that it is okay to have the conversation when it comes to suicide, suicidal ideation, or even patterns of behavior that are just different from what you would normally see from your loved one. And I love how Dr. Ba displayed her passion through wanting to inform and educate the audience and even educate us. And one other thing that stood out to me about Dr. Ba and this particular myth, because I thought that it was true too, that we may see increase of suicidality during the holiday season, but it actually comes based on statistics. You see an increase following the holiday season. And so I thought that was very interesting, but the more that we talked it out and discussed it, it made a lot more sense. What about you, Wendy? What were some of the highlights for you with Dr. Ball?
I think for me, I like how she stressed family problem. No one can fix this in isolation, that you really need to have a tribe or people who love you, a part of the treatment. I think, the red flags that people demonstrate or exhibit, such as, alcohol and substance abuse, being isolated, angry all the time. So those are things that people need to tune into and be aware of. But I also want to go back to that was probably the most important tip about suicidality, that it increases after holidays. So springtime is the time where people are most vulnerable and would take their life. And so audience hopefully tuned into that, because during the holidays, people put on the face.
Yes.
They go to the parties. They celebrate as if everything's okay. And then when all the fanfare dies down and it's quiet and you're alone in your thoughts, then they fall apart and want to hurt themselves. So that's a very good, important tip people need to pay attention to. I think a lot of people walk around with depression, with that commercial that comes to mind for a particular drug, where people are holding up like a mask, because inside that's how they feel, but on the outside they're appearing to be like, okay, everything's cool, I'm functioning, but they are drowning inside and feeling miserable. So I appreciate her passion as well around this topic of suicide prevention and awareness, which is the month of September, and that we all should be talking about it and not running from it. My takeaway.
Absolutely.
So, rounding off our series on resources part 1, we brought to the table Ellie Louise Park, who's the outreach and program coordinator for the University of Maryland's Safe program, which deals with labor and sex trafficking. So, you know, Danielle, sex abuse is my thing. Did it so many years in child welfare. So I was really excited for her new partner that we have met and befriended here at ABH. So I was happy to have her come on and talk about sex and labor trafficking. That doesn't get enough attention. And I wanted her to, you know, talk about the kinds of people that get caught up in labor and sex trafficking. I wanted her to talk about her SAFE program, which is an excellent program that provides a wide variety of services to victims of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I liked how she highlighted that women and girls of color and immigrant women are more susceptible to this tragic, terrible experience being trafficked and abused, either through labor or through sex. And that the key is this service is free. And you know, our community loves anything free, and this is a free service that absolutely anybody who has been involved in this should take advantage of.
I believe in the previous episode, you gave, I don't want to say a warning, but it was kind of like, listen, audience, the next conversation that we're going to have is going to be serious. And I remember also mentally preparing to possibly hear any type of story or any type of statistic that this particular population, that is too high. If I'm just keeping it real, that is just too high. Or a population, as she had mentioned, and as you and I may also know, young girls and women of color, minorities, the population is too high. And a lot of times, where is the awareness highlighted for them? Do we see that on the news? Most times we may not see the women of color and immigrant populations who are victims and or survivors of sex trafficking and assault. We sometimes don't see that. And so for this particular episode, I thought that it was very necessary to highlight it. If we can be some type of change within the particular lexicon of podcasting to bring awareness to sex trafficking, sexual assault, and resources for those who are victims. We also know about the cycle of violence and how many times you may cycle in and out before you decide, I need help, I need resources. If we could be that one resource for that one audience member that's listening, or to give someone that they may know, I think that was really one of the goals. And I think that we did such a good job with just being open and prepared to hear what Ellie had to say. And also Ellie providing us with so many resources. And then the fact, like you said, that services are free. I am just hoping that someone caught hold of that and was able to start in their journey for change, either for someone or say, this has happened to me, and has a voice now to speak up.
Yep, absolutely. Such a topic of mine that's I'm passionate about, important about. I've worked with kids who've been trafficked more on the sexual side as opposed to labor. But what I'm happy laws change, that we can now look at the trafficker in a more criminal light and go after them and give the services to the women and sometimes boys, give them services as they are the victims. So definitely we'll probably have more conversations, may have Ellie back on to talk a little bit more about it. But these topics that we've been talking about, suicide prevention and awareness, trafficking, these are things that need to be discussed over and over again to normalize these events for people and give people courage, as you said, to take that first step into their journey of healing and processing if they are victims. So I was happy to have her on, and a new ABH partner, of course. So Danielle, since we were talking about Ellie Louise Park and her program, SAFE program, that focuses on sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and you did talk about, these delicate topics that we're talking about in terms of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual assault. As we moved into October, which is part 2 of our resource series, we had Colleen Bachman, our guest, who is a supervisor with MoCo, or Montgomery County Trauma Services. And she talked about 2 programs that the county offers in the realm of domestic violence and sexual assault. So the first program is APP, Abused Persons Program, and VASEP, Victims Assistance Sexual Assault Program. And so these 2 programs focus on that intimate partner violence, focuses on sexual assault and women, and giving women or victims in general, because they're not necessarily always women, but giving victims a voice and support for healing. That conversation was great. She was so informative about the 2 programs, really spelled out what happens. There's group, there's advocates.
Right.
It could be an acute or long-term service. I think I liked the part mainly about advocates, because a lot of people who are victims of these crimes, and we are talking about crimes, feel like they're alone, that they have to go through this system by themselves. And these 2 programs, VASEP especially, offers an advocate to help them get connected to services. So that's what stood out for me with Colleen. How about you?
For me, what stood out, in addition to those services that you just spelled out, the empowerment group stood out for me. And just her description of the women's empowerment group, and being able to take such a, as you use the word, I mean, tragic, violent, and sometimes just all around terrible experience, but allowing those women, and yes, maybe sometimes men, but in this particular instance, it was women's empowerment group, to come together to encourage, uplift, and empower one another, no matter what stage they're in, going from victim to survivor. And so I think that's one of the things that I love to hear about when it comes to getting back onto a journey or path of being able to function regardless of your past. It did happen. This is not to discount that it happened, or let's forget not to say let's forget the past, but how can we heal, and who would help in that support? And sometimes it's those who can identify with you, to encourage you, to empower you, as well as those who are mentors, as well as those who are there to support you, and as well as those advocates to help you along the path of truly becoming a survivor of something that otherwise would have taken you down.
Right. I like that these programs are trauma informed. ABH is a trauma informed program. And, we talked about that and what that means, that we as clinicians, even in these 2 programs that Colleen described, VASEP and APP, the therapists who are in those programs look from a lens of trauma. They understand that their clients have gone through something unspeakable and different and difficult, and their experience is affected by that. And so when they're trying to provide services and healing and helping their clients move through the process, it's coming from that space of, I understand what trauma is. So that is valuable, that these programs come from that space of being trauma informed.
Right. And so then this is one that stands out for me, I must say. We had Dr. Rodell Hall of We, Our, Us Men's Movement come and have a conversation with us just about the initiative to empower men in Baltimore City from an inner city perspective, from at times, poverty perspective, and also a perspective to be a change agent. And so I must say that I truly enjoyed Dr. Hall's perspective, as well as his own background history. And what I can appreciate about this particular interview too is that even though he was there to provide us information about his organization, it's almost like, you remember years ago, it's like, well, I'm not only the president, but I'm also a member, or it's this aspect of, yes, I am in this position at this organization, but I can definitely identify with these young men, these inner city men, these fatherless men, and also to be an example. I remember specifically that he said, I have to be everything to my family and my children that my father wasn't to me. And look how that has expanded, and almost like a ripple effect, when you toss a stone in the water, it ripples through. And so not only has he been what he has described or expressed, being a present father and being he and his wife have been married for 30 plus years, but also being that figure in the community, yes, from a faith-based space, but also an initiative space for these men to encourage them and to say, hey, let's do this together. You know, he said, let's make good in the hood. You know, I can actually.
Right, I love that. Let's make good in the
hood.
Good
in the hood. I can actually appreciate his perspective too, because though he spoke about Baltimore City, myself, through different types of missions works and initiatives along the way from very young up until now, I've been able to do and see those things within the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. But the one thing I must say is that I wouldn't be able to identify that experience as a male. And so he opened it up to give us a glimpse of what it was like, as well as his organization. So it stands out fresh in my mind. Wendy, what about you?
I enjoyed this episode tremendously. I appreciate that Dr. Hall was able to join us and talk about this innovative program that he is a part of and is passionate about. And you could hear it in our podcast interview, how he has a personal touch. So he is one that really walks the talk, as they say, that he's in the community. He's experienced a lot of the things these young men are experiencing, and he has taken it upon himself with a whole cohort of people to get into the community and help these young men learn and see there's a different path for them, that doesn't have to be a path of violence, a path of incarceration, a path of substance abuse, a path of poverty. So this was by far a very, very special episode for me as well. Very empowering to hear programs, grassroots programs, if you will, to help people. So
absolutely,
it was a very powerful episode, to say the least.
And then to round out our resources month, till we get to this point here, we had Tanya King Wagner, who works for Child and Family Services Agency, but she also happens to have her own private practice called Rivers of Healing. And we brought her on for a different perspective. And I remember specifically this episode, the vibe was, it shifted a little bit because we came off of such a powerful, strong episode with Dr. Hall from that male perspective, to now have a space for women to really talk about how sometimes we may wear so many different hats, and we have to, or we feel we have to, or society may say, well, you have to be a strong woman, but allowing for there to be a space even for us to be vulnerable, even as we pursue our entrepreneurial dreams and as we climb up the corporate ladder. It is okay to give ourselves some space and to give ourselves permission to just give ourselves grace
and patience. But here's what I like that she said, and that stood out for me, is seize the moment. Be intentional with what you want to do, whether it's getting support, whether it's making that job or career change, whether it's starting a family or what you're doing with your family. Just be intentional about it. And don't wait around. So I love that. And I think that's how we build up women. That's how we support women. That's how we encourage women to be intentional and not be fearful. Go for what it is that you want to accomplish. And learn to get support along the way.
Right. It was that, just give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to allow there to be support. And I didn't forget, she also talked about just sprinkling a little self-care in there too. And we love
manis and petties.
We love that self-care.
Yes, we love our self-care.
Absolutely.
And that goes along with setting boundaries. I think she talked a lot about setting boundaries with your friends and family and your coworkers. You have to. You can't have the weight of the world on you 24/7. Right. And I think that's the message, that women think they have to, and they think they can't ask for help or ask for support because then they look weak. And it's just the opposite. I think for me, when anybody asks for help, that's the strongest thing you can do. Is say, I need help, or I need time away, or I need time for me. That is it. If you can say, I need time for me, that is everything. And that's strength to me, and not having to just wallow in it or move through it or be burdened by it. So having the ability to say, it's about me today. I love it.
I love it too. And Wendy, on that note, this is how we've gotten to this point. We're here at our last episode for the season. Wendy, let me just say that when we started, I didn't know how this was going to go. I knew that we both were excited to have these conversations and excited to explore and have different guests on. But I could not have told you that it would have gone this way, where we have made so many connections, where we have been educated, where we have been refilled, where we have had some laughs, and also where we've had to, kind of open up our perspective to different groups and to different populations and to different situations that otherwise I honestly don't think that I would have been aware of or thought about. And so I am just so proud of this podcast for Advanced Behavioral Health. It is an honor to have you as a co-host, and I'm thankful for your constant encouragement, even offline and off air. I'm thankful even to our audience for listening, every single one of you who listens. We hope that this has been an impactful podcast, and we just hope that you come back for season 2. Wendy, what are your thoughts as we're closing down for the season?
I am absolutely proud of us. You are so intelligent. You are so wise. You made this experience super easy for me because I never envisioned doing a podcast. And you've taught me a lot about it, and I appreciate that as well. I'm happy that we were able to kind of see the vision for our company, ABH, to start having these conversations about mental health, and so that we can normalize it for people. Like, it's just as, you go to a doctor for high blood pressure, see a therapist for a mental health issue. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. And that's where my passion is. Like, this should not be a big deal. And more people, because of this world and everything we're going through, need to reach out and get help. So I am absolutely over the moon and proud for us and our company, and that we've made it a season of 20 episodes. I never envisioned that either, but between how we work together and how we come up with our topics and guests, I'm so looking forward to what season 2 will bring to the audience. And I thank our audience as well. I thank everyone who took the time to listen, everyone who took the time to subscribe. And I'm hoping that each time someone listened, they heard something that they needed to hear. And took the information with them to go get help. And that's what it's all about for me. So I'm just happy.
Yes, absolutely. So even those who have texted me and emailed me to say, hey, I listened to the episode today, shout out to you. Shout out to all of our coworkers who have come on and added to this space of our podcast in the area of mental health. And then also shout out and a big thank you to our CEO, Dr. Vera Kurdian, for even allowing us to have this space. And she has allowed us to be able to be open and explore this new space in podcasting and how it will have a great impact. And I do believe it will have a great impact on advanced behavioral health.
Right. So and shout out to our marketing team too, who's helped, us put together our, the logo and our mantra and putting together the episodes every week. And, Danielle, shout out to you because you are a master editor. People don't know that. And I want people to know that you really understand this whole world of podcasting and editing. And so we couldn't have gotten here without you because there are a lot of things we needed to edit.
Well, when it's a startup situation, it's all hands on deck and we wear multiple hats.
Absolutely.
And so Wendy, I am excited about season 2. I normally toss it over to you and say, hey, what we got coming up next? But yeah, what do we have coming up next for season 2? Or even what is the desire? I know the desire is for us to be visual, but what are some desires you have? And then we're going to close it out one last time for the season.
Well, I don't know if I want to share what our desires are. I want our audience to be wondering and waiting to join us again for season 2. But I will say that we have some new things planned and we'll be more visible in our next season. So that's exciting. And people will have to just wait and see.
That's right. So remember, like, comment, share, subscribe. Go back and listen to the earlier episodes. We want to thank everyone for listening in. My name is Danielle Young with my co-host Wendy Grier. We're making a difference in mental health, always striving to make a difference in mental health. We will see you next season.
Bye.